And we should be recording. We are recording, all is well. Okay, so this is the scary part for me because I don't know who's been waiting to join us. So we will watch the room populate for the next couple of seconds. And while we're doing so, I'm noticing beautiful bookshelves behind you. And I am also just thinking a little bit about just having two writers in the room. And I'm a writer myself. So I would just love to ask a silly writer question for a second. We had Nicole Esperance here last week, and she talked about one of her fun, like, secret tricks of the trade, which is that she uses tarot when she writes. And I'm really curious to know if you have any fun, quirky, fun things that you use when you're doing your character development or when you're writing scenes.
Ooh, I love that. I kind of wish that I did tarot. It's something I've been actually kind of intrigued with for a while. And I've actually looked at some tarot decks online, but I haven't picked one out yet. So I am not into that, but I'm super intrigued by it. So I love that she did that. Honestly, when I do my characters, a lot of things, sometimes I think about, a lot of mine kind of come from people, obviously, like, you know, some of them have aspects of me, some of them have aspects of people I know, but a lot of times one thing I do is I try to cast them in my head. I know a lot of people say that, like, you know, who would play this person in the movie version of your book? And
Yes.
a lot of the times I do really try to figure out like who that would be. And I don't necessarily see that person as I'm writing, but it kind of gives me more of a feel of their energy almost. So when I was writing Life in the Balance, so on the cover, there's this, you know, blonde hair girl. And I'd recently watched the Netflix version of Babysitter's Club, which I totally loved and I was super obsessed with. And the girl who played Stacy, I really had her in my mind as someone who would play Veronica in the ideal Netflix version of the book. But so sometimes I kind of think about who would play my characters in the movie version or the TV version.
That is super cool. That is so cool. Alyson, do you have a fun trick?
I like what you said about energy, because that's one of my tricks that I use. I have a song for each character, but I think it's sort of the same idea, which is that music has like beat and rhythm and feeling. And I don't know why, but that sort of gives me the energy of the character. And I learned that from, I took a lot of acting classes, and I studied at a semester at Tisch. And that was one of the things that we learned in method acting, was to use a song and to give your character a song. And so I took that with me to my writing. But I think it's like literally the same thing as casting your character. It's just a different way of just like what resonates with you as the way that you can keep going back to that. If it's like visual, if it's auditory. I never really thought about myself as an auditory person, but I think I might respond to it.
Oh, I love this. This is so great.
That's really cool.
This is going to be the best discussion. Hi, friends. So my name is Kara Wilson-Cook. I am the events coordinator for the Silver Unicorn Bookstore in Acton, Massachusetts. I'm here with two Massachusetts writers, which is like the best thing ever. But more importantly, if you are a fan of our bookstore, then you know how much we love YA fiction and middle grade fiction. So to be with two YA authors and talk about Jen's brand new book, Life in the Balance, which I'm just so excited to have this in my hands and to hear a little bit of it. It's just like so perfect. It's great. So I just want to say welcome, Jen, and thank you so much for doing this event with us. And thank you for bringing your friend Alyson.
Oh, thank you for having me. And Alyson, thank you for joining me. This is fantastic.
This is going to be so great. And Alyson is the author of Braced. It is Braced. I've been saying that right. Okay, good. You know, sometimes I just don't do things right. Okay, so Braced and Focus. And you have a brand new book coming out in May.
Yep, May 18th.
Yes. And that book is, you told me,
Taking Up Space.
Yes, Taking Up Space. That's right. There is so much going on. And in this space in general, it just makes me so happy. There's just so many books to consume. There's too many books to consume. Before I disappear, because I know that I'm rambling, I want to tell our guests that the chat is open, but the Q&A is open. If you have questions for our two authors, please write them in the Q&A so that way we can see them and answer them. I will pop back in toward the end of our conversation. And as you know, as always, all three of these books and Alyson's new book that's coming out in May is already available on pre-order, by the way, at silverunicornbooks.com. So with that, I'm going to disappear. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. This is going to be so great. And I'm just looking forward to listening to this fun conversation. I'll see you guys in a bit.
Hi.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you, Alyson, for joining me. I really appreciate it. So as of today, Life in the Balance has been out for a week. So it's been really fun to have it out in the world and know that there are people reading it and seeing it. If you guys are managing to get out to bookstores, it's kind of a little different this year. But so Alyson and I were just kind of talk a little bit about the book, writing processes, inspiration, stuff like that. So I thought I would start today by just kind of giving a little overview of Life in the Balance itself, and reading a little bit, and then we get into the conversation and then have a little Q&A. So Life in the Balance tells the story of 12-year-old Veronica, and she is super into softball. She plays competitive softball in her school team, or her town team, sorry, and her mom was a softball player as well, a competitive softball player in college. Her grandmother was. Her great-grandmother is actually on the All-American softball team, if you're a fan of A League of Their Own. And it's kind of been part of her life forever. And she's finally old enough to try out for the softball team, the travel softball team that her town scouts for and has tryouts for. And she's super excited. And a few weeks before tryout, she finds out, her parents sit her down and tell her that her mom is actually entering rehab for alcoholism. And she's obviously not blindsided by this news. It's something she's been noticing. It's something that's been affecting her life and her family's life. But of course, she's devastated. Her mom's going to have to go away, and she's kind of wrestling with all these feelings she's having about what her mom has done, or what she feels like her mom has done to their family. And she also soon finds out that they may not be able to afford her being able to play on the softball team, because rehab is, even with insurance, is costing money. So she kind of hatches this plan with a new friend of hers to see if she can find a way to pay for the team herself, because it's something she just really wants to do. It's, she's a softball player. It's how she defines herself. But throughout this, she kind of realizes that she may have another interest as well, and trying to kind of realize what she needs to balance in her life, between this potential new love and then this passion that she's always had. And it's kind of the one thing she shares with her mom, who's gone away for a while. So I thought I would read you just a little passage to start off. This is from when Veronica and her dad drop her mom off at rehab. So this happens fairly early on in the book. It's not a spoiler or anything like that. It won't feel like that long. Dad claps one of his massive hands onto my shoulder, and I shrink away. The time will go by before you know it. He waves his other hand through the air in a zooming motion, and I imagine it's a jet plane going at supersonic speed. Whoosh, time's up. Mom's home. Things are normal again. I'm not sure if I know what normal is anymore, though. I look around the huge lobby that we're standing in and shuffle back and forth on the shiny floor. My beat-up sneakers look out of place on the black and silver tiles. My jeans and the Travel the World, Read t-shirt I won in last summer's reading contest feel like they're an insult to the huge potted plants and fancy picture frames surrounding me. Then I look over at Mom's faded jeans, held up by a belt, at her baggy college sweatshirt and slip-on clogs, and feel a bit better. Then I feel bad for feeling better. I don't want Mom to look all tired and exhausted like this. It's 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, which means that Mom should be at home right now. We should all be relaxing on the couch watching some cheesy show on Netflix. Then I shake my head, realizing what a fantasy world I'm living in. Because in reality, Mom would usually be at the office right now, trying to log more billable hours. A glass of wine would be next to her too. The only place Mom should be is right here, in the lobby of Pine Knolls Rehab Center, waiting for someone to meet us and show us to her living quarters, where she's going to stay for the next 2 months, alone, without her husband and her daughter, without her family. 2 months is a long time, I muttered to Dad. Mom's a few steps ahead of us, so I figure it's okay to say something, as long as I don't let Mom hear that I'm going to miss her, as long as I don't give her another excuse to try to back out. Right before we left, before they made me leave to come with them, Dad pulled me aside and told me that we need to act happy today, that we need to reassure Mom that everything will be fine and that we'll be okay without her, that we need to accept that this is our reality. Yesterday, my reality was having to buy the watery pasta at school lunch for 3 days in a row because Mom kept forgetting to make my lunch. Annoying, but not awful. Yesterday, my reality was how Camille Henderson, who sits behind me in science class, keeps trying to copy my answers during tests. Irritating, but not awful, as long as I don't get in trouble too. Yesterday, my reality was worrying about whether I'll make the All-Star team and show everyone that I can be the third generation of superstar softball Conway girls. Super anxiety producing, but not awful, most of the time. Today, I have a different reality, the worst reality of all, especially since Dad keeps focusing on how hard this is for Mom, which, yeah, I'm sure it is, but what about me? We have to make things easy on her today, Dad told me right before we left, as I hovered outside his door. He told me I should look nice when we dropped Mom off, by which I thought he meant my jeans without the hole in the knee. Except Dad was standing in front of the mirror putting on a tie while wearing his shiniest black shoes on his feet, the ones he never even wears on sales calls because they hurt his heels after a half hour. Apparently today is important enough for blisters. We have to support your mother so she doesn't feel more guilty than she already does. He pulled and twisted at the strip of fabric on his neck, and it magically turned into a tie. She should feel guilty, I shot back. She's the one who's leaving us. I flopped back onto Mom and Dad's bed. Maybe if I couldn't see or hear anything, then it'd be like this day wasn't really happening. I disappear into some alternate reality where Mom didn't have problems like this, problems that were way more than the problems everyone referred to them as. Your mom has a problem with drinking. The people at Pine Knolls will help her with her problem. Lots of grown-ups have this problem, but lots of them get better too. People say that kids have big imaginations, but sometimes I think that grown-ups are the ones living in their own fantasy worlds. A problem is when my favorite pink shirt is in the wash on school picture day, and I have to wear my second favorite striped one instead. A problem is how I have to stop doing chorus club this spring because all-star practice will conflict with rehearsals. A problem is something I have to solve on my math worksheets. It's exponents and negative numbers and solve for x. A problem has a definite answer. Wash the shirt in time, and you can wear it. Decide to play softball because it's what you've always done, and because you love it, of course. Subtract each side of the equation by 2 and divide by 4 so that x equals 3. A problem isn't anything where lots of grown-ups get better, because what if Mom isn't one of those lots? What happens if she's in that other group, the one that people don't mention? Do they become the negative numbers in their own equations, disappearing without a trace? So that's a portion when Veronica kind of is leaving her mom at rehab for the first time. We kind of follow her journey as she goes along and kind of starts to realize what this means for her and what it maybe doesn't need to mean for her at the same time. So
it's so beautiful. It's such a great book. If you're watching and you have read the book, I'm sure you know this already. If you're watching and you haven't read the book, you now are so moved. I almost started crying so many times when you were reading. Your voice is so powerful. This character is so important. And her struggle and her relationship with herself, with her identity, with her mom, it's complicated and it's real and it's so genuinely middle grade, which at the same time is such an important way to look at a problem.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, this is not your first time around the block. This is your 4th book and your 3rd novel. If you don't know Jen's other books, you really should read them. They're amazing. P.S. I Miss You, Good Enough, and Are You?
You Are Enough.
You Are Enough. And You Are Enough. Of course, You Are Enough.
You are
enough. And they're amazing and just like truly important books in the canon, but just like for everybody who's interested in middle grade and everybody who's this age or parenting this age to read. So I'm curious, now I'm so curious. How is writing and publishing this book a different experience than the other books that you've written?
It actually was. I mean, I think the one thing that was really different about this book is that as much as Veronica definitely has parts of me in her, I think that P.S. I Miss You and Good Enough were much more personal. They really tackled issues that I had struggled with myself. P.S. I Miss You kind of really dealt with a girl kind of questioning a lot of the stuff her parents believed in, and it dealt with kind of doubting, some of the religious beliefs that she was raised with, which is something I went through myself. Good Enough had to deal with Riley, who was recovering from an eating disorder, which was something that I went through. And a lot of that book really drew upon kind of stuff that I had actually gone through personally, like in Writing Good Enough, I went back through my old journals and, thought about, people I had met and experiences I had had. And it was just really, really personal, which made it a much more difficult book to write. And Life in the Balance was a lot more fun to write. And I think it might have because there was distance there, but there was definitely closeness because I took a lot of, there were a lot of parts, that I did draw from myself, feelings and emotions I had had, but it was really unique in that way that I think that distance almost made Veronica more real because she wasn't as much me, if that makes sense.
Totally.
Totally. I felt like I put a lot of me into these other characters in these other books, but Veronica, I kind of crafted and she was totally her own. So it kind of made it a little harder in some ways, but a lot more fun because it was much more of a creative process. So, but I think at the same time, I can definitely see how this book is a progression of my other two, because, it similarly deals with kind of serious issues that kids go through, that I try to kind of infuse with hope and humor at the same time. And that's one thing I really like about Alyson's books as well, is that she deals with these kind of serious issues kids go through and that they're dealing with, which is why I really wanted to talk with you tonight. I thought it would be a good conversation because, her books deal with, a girl dealing with scoliosis and ADHD, and her upcoming book is about a girl with disordered eating, which is just so well done. And I think that books like this that deal with serious issues are just so important for kids because everything isn't just, you're a kid and things are fun. And, as much as I absolutely love, fantasy books and adventure books, and they're so important for kids, I think kids also really need to see themselves and their struggles on the page too, and realize that, they can be pushed through and they can be difficult along the way, but, it's still possible.
So much about what you even read in Life in the Balance, where you just read that section where Veronica talks about like the fantasy that the adults create, sort of like the fictional version of what a problem is, when like a problem is like, this is not actually like the problem that they're talking about. And I think that like as adults, I hear myself doing it all the time and making assumptions about what I have a 3-year-old and like what her life should be like, and like what this like fantasy version of what being a kid is. And it's not that way for everyone for lots of different reasons. And we need to see all those reasons, not just because somebody is going through it. Yes, we need to see that, of course, but because there are kids who are sitting in your class, maybe not sitting in your classroom right now, but we're virtually sitting in your classroom, who, people that you're going to interact with that are going through things that aren't always fun and fantasy and childhood in the way that we want to think childhood is going to be. Growing up is really hard.
Yeah. And I think adults forget that, I do too sometimes, I guess, like you're saying, as a parent. And I think one thing that this pandemic has almost brought to light more is that kids struggle with change too. They struggle with these differences and they're being pulled out of their classes, and, they're scared of certain things, and, mental health issues are rising. And, childhood was hard before this too. And I think a lot of the times, grownups are so stuck in their own struggles that they forget, especially that kids don't know all these coping mechanisms that, that actually we should, but we don't always know either. But I think that it's just really important for, kids to realize that, I'm not the only one who's depressed, or I'm not the only one who's anxious, or I'm not the only one who has to go see a therapist. And it's okay. And I think that's why there's always going to be a spot for those contemporary books. And there's a reason that, Are You God? Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret has lasted so long, because, every kid goes through puberty. Every kid, grows up. So I think that's, it's so important that they're able to see themselves on the page in so many different ways.
Definitely. I'm going to skip ahead. I know we have discussed the questions that we're going to talk about.
Jump around.
But I'm jumping around because you just brought up a really good point. And right now, middle grade is having this resurgence. And, contemporary middle grade, these types of stories, these like honest, real, like truly through the lens of an age appropriate lens, but dealing with things that are really difficult and challenging things that kids really deal with. And so I'm curious, like, why now? Why do you think this is happening? What is your perspective on it? Where do you think it's going? I just want to know all the things.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I mean, I think that this has definitely started, I don't know, maybe in the last like what, 2 or 3 or 4 years, something like that. I definitely think that it's getting much more prevalent to have books that are dealing with serious issues. I think both in YA and in middle grade. Like, you know, YA, I think especially, I mean, I think not starting with Angie Thomas, but, you know, The Hate U Give really, I think started this, let's confront things that, people are dealing with as these divisive issues in our life. And I think middle grade starting to do that too. There's such a diversity of books out there. And I know you've been noticing it too. And, we've even talked about how, we want to make sure that we're allowing all different voices at the table. And I think it's so important to have all different voices on a bookshelf or a library shelf. Because, when you're reading, you want to be able to see that you're there, but also that, there are people who aren't like you. And I guess maybe in the past 2 years, this just kind of started to be more of an awareness that I think, one, that kids are struggling in a lot of different ways. And 2, that we need to make sure that if we want, I guess, the future to be better, that we recognize the diversity of the voices we have out there. And that's why,
in all different ways, right? Like diversity in all different ways, like neurodiversity, like all, in every single way, diversity of experience. And like we've talked a lot about how it's like a responsibility. And this is true for parents who are listening too, like and librarians and teachers, like it's our responsibility as authors, as white, cis, heterosexual authors, to really create that space. Make sure that like there's room for other people at the table. And that's true if you're like, when you're parenting, that you're creating space on your shelf for different kinds of books and different kinds of voices. I think that that's the way that you see the world, the way that I see the world, the way that, somebody else sees the world is just one way. So the more own voices, the more, truly contemporary middle grade books that are dealing with real issues that you can read and introduce, the more perspectives you're going to get, and more lenses you get to see the world through. And that just makes your worldview so much cooler and better.
Yeah, it is nice. I mean, especially with just the more like own voices. I mean, for anyone who's not aware of that, it's like basically when the person writing is the person writing from their own perspective. If you read a book about an autistic character and it's written by someone with autism, I mean, that's just so much more realistic than someone imagining what that would be like. And I think that if you don't do that, you definitely need to do your research. I mean, for example, my mother was not an alcoholic. So I made sure, I talked to people who had, parents who were alcoholics. I talked to someone who was an alcoholic when her kids were little, and she's recovered now, and some people who worked at a treatment center. But I think that kind of, so you want to make sure to do that research beforehand. But I also think that it's really vital that if you also need to know your boundaries. Like I would never want to write a character of color, like a main character of color, because I didn't live that life. But I want to read those things, and I want kids to be able to be exposed to them too. So I've been trying to do that with my daughters too. Like, make sure that when I read them books, and, it's just such a variety of experiences and voices and pictures that they see, because it's so different than when we were growing up, and that wasn't the case at all. So it's nice to be able to write in this environment right now when it's just so welcoming and, so many voices.
Definitely. I'm curious, you said your mother was not an alcoholic. So I'm curious, like, why did you decide to tackle alcoholism, and what did you do to sort of create that closeness for yourself to this relationship? Like, how did you, you talked a little bit about the kind of research you did, but I'm curious, like, how did you put yourself in that position?
So my big impetus for that. So when I started wanting to write Life in the Balance, I wanted to write a sporty girl book, basically. So I wanted to write about a girl who was really into sports, but kind of wasn't sure whether she wanted to make it like a full-time thing. Because one thing I've noticed, my daughters are 9 and 7. And even now I'm starting to notice among their peers that if someone is good at something, they're already like being put in travel teams. Or say this girl is like really good at, doing a cartwheel, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, how many days a week do you do gymnastics? And, like even in 3rd grade. And it's been really interesting for me to watch, because that wasn't the experience I had as a kid at all. And I was one of those kids who was kind of okay at sports. Like I did basketball for a year. I was okay. And then I tried softball for a year. I was okay. I tried soccer. I was okay. And I finally found swimming like later on, and, and I really enjoyed that, but I was never super amazing at it. So I never really kind of felt this pressure to specialize in anything. It was actually different. My brother was just like a superstar at every sport he did. So I kind of, I guess, mixed myself and him with that character. And I wanted to kind of explore like what happens if there's someone who's really, really good at something, but she may not want to make it her life. Like she may want to do other things too, and just kind of dabble and have fun, because I think that's so antithetical to what this society is pushing at now. Like you even have like people saying like, oh, you're like, as like a, a grown-up, you're like, oh, you're good at knitting. Like, why don't you sell your stuff? Like it feels like sometimes things can never just be a hobby. And so I kind of want to explore that balance in, a kid who just kind of wants to have fun. And I was kind of, this idea of balance kind of got extended to her mother. So the inspiration there was my best friend is a recovering alcoholic. And when her kids were younger, she was in rehab for a while. And so it was something they don't quite remember because they were still a little young. But it was something that definitely informs, who she is now, and they know about it now and they're aware of it. And she's, been sober for years, and it's just kind of started me thinking, what would it be like for this character that I've been developing in my head to have a mother, going through this when she was in middle school. And it just kind of made sense for me, like, oh, that makes, that works. Like she's kind of struggling with this balance. Part of the reason her mom kind of was starting to struggle with this because she felt pressured in certain areas of her work life. And it just kind of seemed to parallel each other really well. So, I went on there to do my research. But I found that as the mother of 2 girls, I really gravitate toward, at least lately, these like mother-daughter relationship stories. And I think, I don't know if it's because, just kind of flashing back to some, history in my past, and also just kind of thinking about how I want to parent and, different ways I don't want to put pressures on my daughter or my daughters, and, things I'm aware that, maybe because as a perfectionist, maybe what if I do put pressure on them, and kind of exploring in the book stuff I don't want to do and seeing how it would affect things. So it's kind of just this theme I gravitate towards. So, and I think a lot of authors do that. And I think mine are kind of mother-daughter relationships and this kind of idea of you're okay the way you are. And I think those are like my 2 themes, my like touchstones that I go towards in books.
I love that so much, because there's something about, when you're a kid and you do like you play out scenes, like I will watch Juliet come home from school and she'll like recreate something that happened at school, right? That's sort of like what you're doing with your books in some ways.
In a
like,
way, yeah.
You're like, let me just move these pieces around.
What would happen?
I'm like imagining you with action figures. And
I don't have to mess this up in real life, so I'll like explore it here, right? Yeah.
There's something so smart about that. Like just the way that you just thought about that and said it, that I never thought about before, but it's true. It's like, let me just like figure out how to do it wrong over here in this book and like play the whole thing out.
I never thought of it. That's really, I just kind of like was like, I just thought of this now, but it's interesting. Yeah.
And like how you might, like when you edit a scene, how you might say like, oh, well, actually the mom has to do this instead.
Yep.
Like you end up sort of like playing that scene out in all different kinds of ways. It's so interesting.
I think I read an interview with like a thriller author once. I don't remember who it was, but I think she was saying like, basically I want to get my destructive impulses out on the page so they don't come out in real life. And it's like, I guess that makes sense, right?
Totally. That makes so much sense to me. It's like you've all this stuff in your head and like all this experience in your head, and to be able to play it out in a place that's like safe, maybe not for your characters, but safe for your family.
It makes it more exciting for the book, I guess, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think in some ways as authors, we're puppet masters and we're sort of always moving our people around and putting them in bad positions, and you can't like protect the characters too much, otherwise the story's not interesting. But it's such an interesting way of looking at it. Why softball? Like, why didn't you pick softball?
I picked softball. Like I said, it was one of those sports that I tried when I was younger and I really wasn't that great at, but I really liked it. Like it was one of those things I think I kind of wanted to be good at, but I wasn't. And I didn't really stick with it because like I wasn't that great at it. Yeah. But I think maybe this was kind of my way to be like, well, what if I was really good at it? And one of those like wish fulfillment things.
Totally. You know, I relate to that because I was a terrible athlete, but all my books are about sports because I like love to be on the team.
Yeah. I like doing it, you know, and it's interesting though, because I love writing about, you know, teammates and like camaraderie between, you know, girls and friendships. But I always found that, you know, as I grew up, like the sports I'm good at are more individual sports. So, but I love writing about the relationships. Yeah. And I think, you know, a team sport is just, it's more, you know, it's a dynamic that is, you know, it works so well when you're talking about friendship too, I think.
Yeah. How did you like get the physicality of it and the ball and the bat? Like, how did you do it?
I'm laughing because I just still remember like writing and I'm being like going like this and like throwing the ball. And I'm like, do you ever do that? Like if you're writing and you like make a face if the character's mad. So
what does it look like when you're like,
so I think I was luckily this was, I drafted this before COVID. So I was at home and no one was around and I was able to be all, you know, weird, but, I was definitely, you know, watching things, reading things, you know, YouTube's wonderful, actually, thank goodness. And so there are lots of games on there. But I think, you know, just kind of playing it out in my head, going it over, copy editors are wonderful too. Like I just remember this little nitpicky thing there, like, you know, just, you know, they wouldn't be exactly in this position. And actually I had a wonderful teacher who read an arc of this, and it was something that I must have missed and the copy editor must have missed. And she's like, you know, in a youth game, they really wouldn't have a base coach there. In college, they would, but in youth, they wouldn't. And I was like, oh my God, I totally missed that in my research. So thank you. And luckily we were able to get it in right under the wire. So I was like, thank goodness, because that's like, I mean, that's something I never read in all the articles and all the people I talked to. You know, it's not like I would ask, like, is there a difference in the referee in this specific spot? So I was like, oh, you're great. But yeah, it's just like these little details. And it makes me realize that, you know, if I read a book and find a little detail that these authors work really hard and they're going to miss things every once in a while. So
definitely. No, but that's such a great little note to have because your softball player readers it becomes more authentic for them.
Yeah.
Especially because they're their own age. They're not the next stage in playing softball.
And I know that for me, like, I know you're a Massachusetts native. Like I have read books before literally about Boston and they call it the subway. And I like take the book and I'm like, nope, I'm done. You can't read it anymore. So those little details matter sometimes because of like, I'm like, if you call it the subway, I'm not going to read it. I'm sorry. You don't know what you're talking about. So
yeah, so I think because so many books take place in New England and there's
like,
also I feel I live in Brooklyn now. I live in New York now, but like I'm like from 20 minutes, 30 minutes outside Boston. Like that is how I define myself.
Yep.
And so like there are some things about that identity that if you get that wrong and you like get certain things wrong, I'm like, no, but you missed it. And it really does,
totally.
It really irks me. So I'm curious, you chose to have Veronica as a softball player, but also as a singer. And I'm wondering, now we know a little bit more about why you chose the two different identities for her. But I'm curious why singing, like was that the other side of it for you?
Yeah. So singing is kind of the thing, Veronica. So the way she kind of wants to earn money is she teams up with this friend of hers and they decide to enter the school talent show or the town talent show and they make the singing act. And in the process, she kind of realizes that, you know, I was in chorus at school. It was so fun. And I actually kind of want to continue doing this. And singing was something I was really into in high school. I was in, you know, the chorus, the select choir, I was in the musicals. So that was something I really, really loved doing. I took voice lessons.
So that was friends in high school.
I know. that was one of my things that I was really into. So I kind of wanted to make that, one of her passions. And my daughter's also taking voice lessons at the moment. So that was and when I told her that, she's like, oh, is she taking voice? She's into it like me? I'm like, yes. So it was a little Easter egg, both, I guess, to me and to, my daughter, who really loves to sing. She wants to be Taylor Swift when she grows up. So
I love that. I love that. Good person to look up to. I love that. What has this past year been like as a writer for you?
It has been hard. So I'm just homeschooling my daughters this year, which has been really an interesting experience. I'm glad we did it. It was the right choice for us, but it's been hard because, we chose to do that just so they wouldn't have to be fighting over screens all day long and talking over each other and one stuck in the room. And so I'm kind of teaching them both at the same time, which is basically just in the morning. But it's been really creatively draining, and I didn't expect how draining it would be. So I've been making sure to kind of just be really easy on myself. And, I'm glad I got the chance to draft and edit a book a little bit this summer, which was great. I'm glad I kind of pushed myself to do that, because that was kind of the biggest downtime, least stress part, I think, of this whole pandemic, when we were able to be outside more. But this winter has been really tough. So I've been trying to, plot something new at the moment. And I'm just kind of making sure that I am okay and easy on myself if I don't have the energy to do work every day. Like, I've been trying to do something, a few days a week, and, make sure I still am keeping up with things, so I kind of still feel like a writer. But I've been trying to be easy on myself too, because I think that I can tend to be a perfectionist. I think a lot of writers can, but I've never really been of the mind that to be a real writer, you have to write every day. Because I think part of it is also, you need to have downtime sometimes to be able to, observe the world or, get an idea. And sometimes if I try to force something, I'm like, oh, I have to write, and I start writing something, it's not the right thing. And, it might just be an idea I'm forcing. So I've been trying to kind of almost see this as this like fallow year, or fallow few months, and just kind of, what's sprouting and what's going to come soon, because, I'm starting to feel it come, the next idea come. I've been kind of jotting down plot notes in an outline. So it feels like it's coming up a little bit again. So that's good.
I like that. I'm curious, and you don't have to answer this if you don't feel comfortable, but what does it mean when you're easy on yourself? Like, what does that look like? Do you do something nice for yourself? Do you use certain words with yourself? Because that's a really, I try to tell myself that a lot. And I think a lot of people watching would be interested to know, what does it mean to be easy on yourself?
I think mostly for me, it's like the self-talk. If I'm really not feeling like I can't write, I just don't know. I don't even know what to do. I'm stuck. I can usually say okay, I'm not going to write today, because, the girls are yelling at me anyway to go do something with them. But usually a lot of times, if I'm putting pressure on myself to be productive, like the rest of the day, I'm like, I should be writing right now, or I should have written today, or, oh my God, I haven't written in 2 days. And I think for me, a lot of it is just changing that self-talk and just saying, okay, well, I'll try to write tomorrow, or, I know this weekend I have a huge block of time and I work better in blocks of time, so I'll just plan to do something then, or I just turned in something to my agent, last week. It's okay to have a few days off. And I think that's something kind of I've been learning throughout my life, is how to be easier on myself. So I'm trying to really put it into practice.
No, I think it's really good. It's helpful also for me to hear, because I've been having a couple of weeks of I'll sit down and I'll sit there all day,
right?
And just nothing comes out. And so finally I said, if I'm going to not write and give myself a hard time, I might as well just do something else I want to do. I might as well read, go for a walk, think, instead of sitting here and making myself feel bad, because it's not getting me anywhere.
And walks actually really help too. Sometimes after I'm done teaching the girls for the day, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go, you girls have lunch. I'm going to have lunch a little after you, but while you're eating, I'm going to go for a 15-minute walk, just circle around the neighborhood and just think. And the other day, actually, that I did that, and I started having an idea, and I was like, oh, cool. So I think just getting outside helps a lot too.
For me also, it's actually taking a shower, like being in water. That's why swimming, I don't know if you feel that way with swimming, but anytime I'm in water, like
it helps. Yeah.
Helps my brain starts to like, I don't know, pieces sort of come together.
Yeah, I can definitely see that.
What's next for you?
So I am not under contract right now. So I have something on submission to people. So hopefully cross your fingers on that. But I'm actually just right now, I am doing a work for hire thing for Disney.
Amazing.
Writing, it's for Disney in Europe. It's the third book in a series, a trilogy. I've been working with them about Minnie and Daisy as spies. So it's
cool.
It's so fun to write. So it's like an early chapter book, and it's licensed with Minnie and Daisy. So it's really, really fun to write. And it's kind of something I can do in between the books. So this is the third and last one. So it's nice to be able to, I'm already working on that. So I don't have to worry about the next Jen book just yet. So I'm kind of in the process of planning that. So I'm working on that right now, and just kind of figuring out what the next step is.
Yeah, I like that a lot. When you say that also makes sense, sort of like after your third novel, I feel like it's like time to reevaluate.
What's next? Yeah.
What's next? Like, it's a good time to sort of say like, what do I want to be next?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, this book is amazing. And all of the people who have read it and are talking about it are saying incredible things, like me and other people. It's just an incredible book. It is. It's gonna change things for a lot of people. It's gonna make a lot of readers feel deeply, and I think see themselves and see their friends. So I'm excited. Well, I'm excited to hear whatever's next for Jen when you're ready.
Thank you. And Alyson's book is coming up in May. So I read an earlier copy of it, and I already have it pre-ordered. So keep an eye out for that as well.
You. And that book wouldn't exist without Jen. I mean, really.
Thank you.
No, it really wouldn't. Like we had this like very long phone call where she was like coaxed me and helped me to find this book. So
I was actually, when I was reading your early copy of it, was the very last time I was on a plane last February. Right? Can you imagine?
Wow. What a story. Wow.
Remember planes?
Wow. Yeah, right. Wow. This has been an amazing discussion. I want to invite our participants, our attendees, to ask questions. We have a couple of minutes. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A. I have a question about just about process, just while we're getting started. And this is for the both of you. I attended SCBWI's conference this weekend. I don't know if y'all did. And I loved the craft chat that Jerry Craft did with Victoria Jameson about graphic novels, which is like the new hotness, right? And so I'm really curious to know about, first of all, if either of you as authors are excited about that space, and how you approach your beginning outlining, because they talked a lot about storyboards and about like crafting scenes, and I'm really curious, for the both of y'all, how you approach that. So even if you're not drawing things, I would just love to know how you do that.
I love graphic novels. I've not written one, but I cannot ever illustrate one, but I mean, actually it would be kind of fun to write like a storyboard for one day. But so usually what I do, at least in the past, is I kind of have this germ of an idea. And like I was saying, I kind of had the softball player girl idea, and then I kind of combined with the mother. And then once kind of a bunch of things combine in my head, and I have this kind of idea of the character and her big struggle, I usually write like 20 pages because I'm super excited to start writing. And then at that point, I'm like, I'm not sure what's going to happen now. So I stop. And at that point, I kind of storyboard. I outline it, and I do kind of a chapter by chapter, scene by scene. I make a list of who are the other characters, what do they look like? What do they want? How are they related to her? And then kind of just go like beat by beat through the story. And then at that point, I can kind of write the rest of it, and things can change, of course. But I guess I'm kind of a mixture of like, I kind of like dive in at the beginning and then realize that, I need to learn how to swim. So let's start planning a little bit. the book that I'm kind of thinking of writing next is a little bit more, may have more of a mystery involved. So I think for that, I may have to actually really sit down and world build and outline beforehand. So I'm a little nervous, but I'm kind of excited to do it a little bit differently this time. But beforehand, it was kind of dive in and then stop and then figure out that, all right, and I need to plan that from now on.
Super
cool. I wish I could do any of that. My writing process is that I literally rewrite the first 80 pages over and over and over and over and over again for 6 months until I figure out what's going on.
That works.
I'm like, what's
That's legit.
This book? Like, just over and over and over. And it's so painful, but that is my process. And
that's legit. That's legit. People do that. I've done that.
Yeah. And that's the only way that I know how to figure out, like, what does my character want? Where are we going? And then usually I write the end. I write the last scene, or I write at least as far into the book as I can see. And then I make my way there. Because I usually know what's going to happen at the end.
Yeah, I kind of need to finish a draft for, like, I definitely edit a little bit as I go along, but I kind of need to finish that draft before I go back and make any major changes. And I definitely often see major changes between the first and the second draft. Like, they can be pretty dramatic.
So what I'm hearing from the both of you is that you love the revision more than the drafting.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. There's some authors who love the drafting. So I think that that's an interesting, like, there's plotters and pantsers, and then I think there are drafters and revisioners. And so it's really interesting to see the different, different boxes that we put ourselves in. I think that's really interesting.
I kind of have a theory. Like, I've noticed that a lot of my introvert writing friends are really into revision. I'm not sure if that's because almost like for me, like in my previous career, I was librarian, like, and I just love the kind of structure of it. Like, I'm like, all right, I already know kind of what happens, so I can work within the structure, still be creative, but I kind of know that there's already something there to work with. And I love having that. And I think I've noticed that a few of my extrovert writer friends are really into drafting, because it's kind of like push through and explore and just go. And that's just kind of like, it's probably totally wrong and not realistic at all, but it's something I've noticed in a few different people.
I think that's true though, because I'm like, people assume I'm an extrovert, but I'm really an introvert. Like, I have to recharge my battery.
Same.
I feel like that's the definition, right? Is do what you actually need to fuel yourself. And I feel like it is probably true that, like, I'm totally a revision person, because I like to, like, have the house and then, like, decorate it and, like, rearrange the pots and like that's where I, like, do my best work. But the building of the house is, like, terrifying.
It's harder.
It's harder. But I think you're right. I think the extroverts of the world are like, let me, like, build this house.
Yeah, right.
This is great. So Catherine has a question, and I'm going to read it. So she asks, for the both of you, do you have any particular framework for portraying serious topics in a way that is honest but age appropriate for middle grade?
I don't know if I have a framework, but I think the biggest thing for me is making sure that there's humor involved too. I love kind of peppering in jokes or inside jokes that the characters have with their friends, or, of course, the well-placed burp joke, or, stuff like that. And I think that's kind of one of the beauties of writing for middle grade, is because you can still have that just pure silliness involved. And I think that when you're writing about serious issues, you really need to have that, because otherwise it's too heavy. And I think especially for a kid who's reading this to kind of get hope that there are other people, dealing with this, you need to not plunge in. If you're, like, really struggling, you can't plunge into a book that's exactly like this deep, dark feeling you have. Like, you need to have both, I think, the hope that things will get better and that they can get better, and also just instances where this darkness is balanced out with a scene after it of lightness, because you kind of need that rest almost. Like, if there's a really emotional scene, you need this kind of just really this wave to kind of pull you up a little bit, so you can kind of progress and go through the story until the next deep part. So I think it's just kind of having that balance, and I guess maybe that is a framework in a way, just kind of having those beats, those shifts between dark and light.
I totally agree with that. I think for me, one of the things that I always keep in mind when I'm writing my novels is I try to remind myself that, you know, I wore a back brace for 2.5 years. And I started getting monitored for scoliosis when I was 7. Wow. And I think a lot of the time about how, like, I was plopped into these like very adult things and how I didn't know what was coming. Like, I couldn't see the next thing because I'd never experienced it before. And so I didn't know the danger that was ahead. And I think in some ways when you're writing for this age group, you have to remember how vulnerable they are because they've never experienced some of these things. So like when somebody they have a crush on, right, rejects them, it's the first time and they don't know that it's going to feel better eventually. And that person that has just like shattered their heart is not going to matter in 5 years. Like your character doesn't know that. Everything matters, and it matters so big. And it's the first time it's ever been hurt and the first time they've ever felt things. And then it's also like they have no sort of sense of the pain that's ahead. Like if we knew now what we did, like it would be so much worse, like going into it in some ways. Like that's where the hope comes from, I think, is that you just don't have the experience to have that fear, which is what makes it so exciting as an adult to be able to write those characters, knowing you're going to like plop them into the boiling water and especially the social boiling water, like you're going to get to play that out, but your character like doesn't know what's coming, and in a really like genuinely naive way for the most part. And so that's like something to remember, to protect them as much as possible and give them safe people to help them as they navigate trying to find their way without any experience.
So I love that concept, and I'm very curious to know how that theme and thread will carry through as the both of you navigate narratives in a post-COVID world for these young readers who, you know, they're experiencing COVID in real time, and then your future readers will have experienced COVID as even younger. So what do you think that will mean for the narratives that you end up writing in this space?
I'm still figuring that out. I mean, the next book I wrote that it's out on submission now, I didn't address it. It just kind of went as this world that perhaps maybe it's a few years in the future and everything's normal again, but I kind of just didn't address it. I wrote it in the middle of COVID, and I think that was part of the reason I couldn't quite, I wasn't ready myself to address it yet. But I think that there are definitely readers out there. There are so many kids who they need this addressed in books. And I saw a Twitter thread the other day by the author Anne Ursu, who has written a bunch of wonderful middle grade books. And she was saying that basically, like, you know, kids need books to address the feelings they're going through right now. But I think it's just going to be, I'm still figuring this out. And I've talked to a few other writers saying like, we're not sure how to do this yet, because I mean, one, we're not sure how this is going to end, when this is going to end. I'm also not sure what publishing wants yet, for books like this. So it's still really, really tricky. I read an arc of a young adult book that's coming out maybe this fall. I'm not sure exactly when, but it took place a year after COVID, and like a few different times it like said, it referred back to like, oh, the character was saying something about, yeah, remember last year when we were all quarantined? And it was almost like a shock to read it, because I was like, oh, whoa, like it was the first time I'd actually read it referred to in a book. And it was really interesting. And I think I'm still figuring out exactly how to navigate this myself.
I don't think we know how kids are changed by it yet. I think we have some idea. I think information is coming in. I've been teaching virtual writing classes, and so I'm seeing, and the students in my virtual classes have been exploring how they're feeling. I think that what kids are experiencing now, some of it they understand, and some of it they don't even understand the full trauma of it. So I think the trauma is deep. I think it's complicated. I think for some kids, it's different for every kind of kid in every kind of environment, depending on, how capable the adults are in helping them navigate their own feelings and in making it an experience that is as manageable as possible. But I don't think we know yet. I just don't think we have the answers. So I'm working on a book right now. I've been drafting a book. I haven't been working on it for 2 weeks. Before that,
Nobody's been working on books for 2 weeks. No, you're good. You're good.
And I just ignored it also. I just think, that's where I am right now. But who knows? That might change. I mean, I'm still revising those 8 pages. So never know what's going to happen.
It's true.
It's going to be a new frontier. It's going to be kind of crazy, but it has to happen.
Yeah.
That's why I'm curious.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Wow. This has been kind of amazing. And I'm so grateful. Alyson, you're a great host. I just want you to know that.
You did so good.
Yeah, you did so well.
Amazing. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad to be here.
This was so much fun. I'm gonna hold up these beautiful books again, and just to make sure that everybody knows. And just to be clear, if you want a signed copy of Life in the Balance, you got to come to the Silver Unicorn and kind of pick one up. But there are some available, so you should just know. And if you, I want my camera to focus. There we go. It's so pretty. And just so that you know, if you are not local and you can't just pop into the bookstore, that's okay. Because you can order from silverunicornbooks.com and just say, I'd like a signed copy, please, in the comments before you check out. We'll make that happen for you. So that's that. And then, Alyson, if you want to come by the bookstore because you're semi-local and sign a couple of copies of your books.
I do. We can talk after this.
Hey, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So that, friends, these are also available at the Silver Unicorn Bookstore. And I think I just heard that maybe signed copies might show up. Maybe. So we'll talk about that. So you can come and find those at the bookstore or at silverunicornbooks.com. Any just lingering thoughts before we say goodnight and kiss babies goodnight and otherwise go to bed, which is what I'm trying to do. I don't know about y'all, but
I want to thank you for this event, for all of the support. I love your bookstore. It is wonderful, and it's just so wonderful to have it in the community. So, and it's wonderful for you to have these events and be able to. It's just so great the way bookstores have been pivoting, and I really hope that virtual events stay in the future, because it's so nice to be able to go to things that I couldn't in the past.
Totally. Yeah. Agree. Yeah. This has been the best.
Thank you.
Just thank you so much. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for choosing us for an event, Jen. Congratulations on your new book.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Amazing. And congratulations to all of us, because it's a big, really great read.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
It's so true. Congratulations in advance to you, Jen. We'll be talking about the release of your new book. And I think that's it. Everyone, please stay safe. Please stay healthy. Please keep reading. And we'll see you again soon. All right.
Have a good night.
All right. Have a good night, everyone. Bye-bye.